Hi, welcome to the Pearson Maths Festival. We are thrilled to have you join us today. My name's Hannah Cheek. I am the head of the Maths Qualifications and Curriculum at Pearson. We believe that maths should be engaging and accessible to all, and our aim over the course of the festival is to come together as the maths teaching community to share amazing ideas and stories of how to engage and inspire our learners, especially in how we can amplify the teaching and learning experience and empower all those involved in maths education, whether that's teachers, learners, families and communities. That's why our free conference is focused on driving the conversation forward, from reflecting on the recent changes in education and sharing best practice to what the future of maths education could look like. Together with you, fellow educators and industry experts, our conversation will drive how we can help schools, colleges, learners and families to make the most of maths education now and in the future. To ensure as many people as possible can benefit from our discussion, we'll be recording this session and the others throughout the week. However, we do hope that you can join us in as many of the sessions live as possible so that you can benefit from and contribute to the live discussions and pose your questions too. So during this session, all participants can send in questions via the question and answer box. We'll answer as many of your questions as we can during the session. Please also use the chat function to talk to each other throughout the session. You can be part of the conversation on social media too. You can use the hashtag Pearson Maths Fest 21, and you can also enter some of our mini competitions, nominate your maths champions and answer polls that you'll see on the @Pearson Schools Twitter handle. Please do get involved. So I'm joined today in this session about maths anxiety by Dominic Petronzi, Rosie Sharp and Cate Stokes. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe we could just start with some quick introductions. So Cate Stokes, could we start with you, please?
Hi, I'm Cate, and I am a research lead and maths lead in my school, amongst various other things.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Rosie?
Hi, I'm Rosie Sharp. I'm Head of Faculty and Quality at Fareham College down on the South Coast, and I, as part of that remit, look after the Maths and English team.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Dom?
Hello everyone, I'm Dr Dominic Petronzi, a lecturer in psychology at the University of Derby, maths researcher for 11 years now, and very pleased to be here, so thank you to Pearson for having me.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights around this really important topic around maths anxiety. Before we started, actually, we were just chatting about how this has come up in so many sessions during the festival, and it just seems to weave its way through everything to do with maths education. We know it affects so many learners and adults across the country, and the stats around maths anxiety are really shocking. 1 in 5 parents suffer from a fear of numbers. 36% of 15 to 24-year-olds feel anxious about maths. 1 in 10 8 to 13-year-olds also feel anxious about maths, and women are more than twice as likely to be anxious about using maths and numbers as men. So I'm going to start with a few questions to you, Dom, if that's okay, and some of the research that you've completed. Sure. So could you just tell us a bit about what maths anxiety actually is, and what some of the factors are that cause it?
Yeah, sure. So maths anxiety, it's had many different definitions over the last 50, 60 years in the time that it's been researched. But it is now sort of accepted as it's a pervasive psychological issue. It's associated with poor maths attainment and also poor engagement with jobs and courses that involve numbers. So we do know that maths anxiety, especially if you develop maths anxiety early on in life, it pretty much sets you up on a negative trajectory. Sometimes people can be diverted from that, maybe through parental input or other factors such as an influential teacher that helps them to reconnect with maths and see the positivity and the application of it. But otherwise, we do tend to see those that particularly struggle early on do set that negative trajectory. Maths anxiety, or maths, it's considered to be a performance-based anxiety. And typical responses that are symptomatic, include physiological arousal. So for someone that is maths anxious, in the moment of, or even thinking, anticipatory thoughts about maths can lead to, for example, increased heart rate or sweaty palms, for example. Negative cognitions is also symptomatic of maths anxiety. So when we talk about negative cognitions, we're thinking about those intrusive thoughts. And it's intrusive thoughts. So imagine you're in a maths test situation and you look up and you see other people working and you think, wow, I'm terrible at maths. I've always been bad at maths. Everyone says I'm bad at maths. Even my parents were bad at maths and they say it. All those negative thoughts, including what will happen if I fail? You know, will I get into college? Will I get to the university I want to go to? All those negative thoughts, those negative cognitions are what actually impacts your working memory. And working memory is a key cognitive component of completing maths and doing it successfully. So all that intrusive thought, all those negative cognitions really limit our ability to get stuck into maths and to do it well. We also see associated with maths anxiety avoidance behaviors. So for any practitioners here, anyone working in education, you may see sometimes that children and young people, even adults as well, will sacrifice accuracy in favor of speed. So they'll just literally try to storm through it as quickly as possible just to get it out of the way. You may also see avoidance behaviors in the form of people walking around the classroom, or suddenly they need to go to the toilet. It may even be through disruptive behaviors. So, you know, purposely trying to disrupt others or to disrupt the class. These are sort of seen as almost trying to be self-preservation based behaviors. So I'm choosing not to do the maths rather than the maths is defeating me. So it's a lot more complex when we really start to scratch the surface. We know that maths anxiety is distinct from general anxiety. So someone could be generally quite confident, but also have particularly high maths anxiety. And we know that there can be anxiety in other subjects. So for example, learning a foreign language or learning a musical instrument, but maths has been shown in research to cause the most intense anxiety. So yeah, there's a lot going on with maths. We also know that there's an emotional element of maths anxiety. So it may be sometimes that it has been regarded as more of an emotional issue rather than an intellectual deficit, whereby if we can try to intervene or remove a little bit of the anxiety, you can often see an underlying ability. So there really is an emotional element associated with this. I could refer to research that has shown that for some individuals with high maths anxiety, certain parts of their brain, so the amygdala, which is all based around processing emotions, and areas such as the frontal parietal network, for someone with high maths anxiety, those parts of their brain are high activation, so they're processing all that negativity. Whereas for someone that is low maths anxious, we actually see low activation in those brain regions, but higher activation in brain regions that support task efficiency. So even at the cognitive level, there's key differences between someone with high and someone with low maths anxiety. As well, research has shown that for those that do have high anxiety, there's a neural response that replicates the threat and vigilance associated with a specific phobia as well. So if someone says to you, oh wow, I feel like I have a phobia of maths, it might actually well be true that their neural response could actually reflect that. And we know as well with maths anxiety that it can get individuals into that negative cycle whereby they have negative feelings about maths, so they avoid it, and then they don't prepare as well for maths, and then that leads to poor performance. And then that poor performance means that they have negative feelings about it, so they want to avoid it. And you really do see that negative cycle, being very much in place with maths anxiety. And we know that it can be felt to greater extremes by those with, for example, dyscalculia. So there's a lot going on. And in terms of, Hannah, some of the factors that you asked about. So the fact that maths is very much seen sometimes as a very black and white subject. So there's no middle ground. It's either your answers are wrong or they're right. That's a conception around maths. There's often rigidity associated with it. So again, there tends to be limited creativity. So for example, we might see in schools, they have to, obviously work into the curriculum and so many time limited demands, they have to require that the students work or complete a problem in a very specific way. Whereas for some children, they may require that flexibility or creativity to go and explore, actually, how might I come to that same answer in my own way? But that creativity can sometimes we don't always have the time and space to allow for that creativity. Some people as well may have a negative relationship with their tutor or their teacher, so that can lead to maths anxiety. We know as well from research that practitioners themselves can transfer their own anxieties to children, and for some reason, researchers found that females, in terms of female practitioners and female students, tend to transfer more than we would see between male students and male practitioners. Some children, we know from very early on, and particularly in my own research, some children can be very aware of an ability deficit from very early on in education. And in the UK, we're talking reception in year 1. Some children will accept, well, they have that fear of failure, but they accept that they're going to fail. So there's so many different factors that are associated with maths. It makes it a really complex thing to try and manage. And I'm sure I could talk about this all day, but I'm aware that I need to pass the ball as well. So yeah, there's so much going on.
Yeah, and it's so complex with so many different factors, obviously, you know, that are feeding into causing this anxiety. And in your experience, is there an age by which, you know, you need to try and prevent this cycle from starting, or can people start to experience maths anxiety at any age? And is there anything around sort of, it's obviously so pervasive across the country, is there anything that parents can do, or is there stuff that parents do that convey this anxiety to their children?
Yes. So in terms of the age, so when I started my PhD research in 2010, the literature was very much suggesting that maths anxiety doesn't develop, or we don't see signs of it until about the age of 7. So I conducted some qualitative research whereby I actually sat down with children and asked them about their maths feelings and their experiences, because it seemed that research up to that point hadn't really thought to do that. So I did that in my research, and I actually found evidence of maths anxiety from as early as reception. So we're talking about age 4, which was, it just seemed, you know, it was like a wow moment, like, wow, so maths anxiety can actually be evident from an early age. And I sort of toyed with the idea of, well, do we call this maths anxiety, or is this sort of a prerequisite to maths anxiety? You know, maths anxiety, we think about maths, and maths is, you know, maybe algebra or equations or you know, SOHCAHTOA, you know, things like that. So I toyed with the idea of, well, do we actually have maths anxieties from such an early age, or is it more based around numbers? Is it more like number apprehension? And if that isn't necessarily dealt with early on, does that then lead to maths anxiety? So that's something that I very much, a concept that I played with during my PhD to, you know, as a prerequisite to maths anxiety. And in terms of the things that perhaps parents might do to try and support, well, there's actually quite a lot of things. So avoiding or simply being aware of maths anxiety is a start. So if you have that awareness of what maths anxiety is and how it works, that's in itself a strategy, an intervention that can be employed with a child to try and support them. Because if you know the sorts of things that are happening, particularly at the cognitive level, you can work around that. But I think particular things to be aware of are to try and avoid or to be mindful of the pressure of maths. Maths in itself is a very, there's a lot of pressure naturally around the subject, like I mentioned before, with it being so right or wrong sometimes. And it's just about trying to make it fun. And even more importantly, perhaps, is to try and show that wider application of maths. So wherever possible in the real world, show where maths is valuable. Or if you have a child, for example, that loves motorsport, talk to them about how maths is really important in that. And, you know, it's all about how designing cars and get them inspired into the subject early on so that they can see the application of the subject. As I mentioned previously, the transference of negative attitudes in maths, it might be a flippant comment, but to say around a child, for example, oh, I hated maths at school, or I was terrible at maths at school. We've all done it, but those are the things, particularly for a child, that they absorb and they focus on. And in my research, teachers said to me, oh, we've had sometimes parents of, you know, children parents have come to parents' evening and said in front of the child, oh, they won't be good at maths because I was terrible at maths. And then the child's actually used that excuse later on, like the next week in school when they couldn't do something. So children can very quickly absorb those negative attitudes. So it's just to be mindful of the language and actually what we expose them to.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, just no, over to you, Hannah. There's more, but I'll stop.
We will come back to you, Dom, because
no worries.
need to extract all of that knowledge and information while you're here to share. But it does move us really nicely on to Emma's story, actually. So I was going to speak to you, Emma, because you've been doing some great work of engaging parents in your schools. So not just, and your primary sector, which is obviously, you know, a really key milestone in terms of maths anxiety and it sort of developing. So could you tell us a bit about what you did to support parents in your schools and the impact that that had on your students?
Yeah, of course. So it was really interesting listening to Dom talk, because it's all things that I've recognised firsthand myself, both with the children and with parents. Just as an aside, really quickly, working with reception children in deprived areas, which is predominantly where I've taught, I've definitely noticed firsthand, anecdotally, that there is a real anxiety towards anything math based, even when children are independently accessing these activities within their provision. And I've noticed that anxiety. In terms of parents, I mean, there are many sides to why there's that anxiety, going back to what Dom said again. And I really think there's a societal acceptance that it's okay to be bad at maths. And so often in parents' evenings, we've had those comments talking about how they were bad at maths. So it's no wonder that their children are. And that can create, when it comes to helping their children firsthand, that can create a bit of a reluctance to engage in that maths learning. Also, alongside that, something we've noticed a lot in primary is that lots of parents struggle to understand the mastery approach, which is used more and more within schools. And when that happens, that again, it's a disengagement, it's not wanting to engage, because that, coupled with the maths anxiety, means that you have such a wide range of parents and carers out there that are really struggling to comprehend what their children are being taught. That then trickles down to the pupils in many cases, and it can lead to a real reluctance from the child's perspective, in my experience, to engage with their maths learning. So if parents and our carers are struggling to help their children learn at home, then I think part of our responsibility as teachers is to help them understand. So something that I was working on quite a lot in my last school, in a pre-COVID world, so it was easier without the COVID restrictions, to help engage parents and carers with the maths learning, is setting up parent workshops. And everything that we did was engaging collaboratively with parents and carers to get across that there was a partnership. Partnership's really key to what we did. Before anything even happened with the maths, we had to lay those foundations to ensure that there was a partnership and there was a trust level there. And the very first thing I did was bring them all in and talk about their own experiences with maths. Let them get it all out. It was open season. They could say whatever they needed to say, and it became a bit of an informal sort of therapy session for everyone. And I shared my own experiences growing up, and surprisingly, even though I adore maths now, I had really, really severe maths anxiety when I was a child, especially in secondary school, and really struggled to even get me through the door in a GCSE lesson. So what was really interesting in those workshops was everyone walked through the door feeling quite insecure and nervous. Even those parents that appeared quite confident on the school gates, they were quite nervous coming in to that learning situation. And what I wanted to do was ensure that on that first session, they left with a smile on their face. So it really was just about getting to know each other and building up that trust level, and explaining really what mastery was. So before we went even further, just explaining what that approach meant. So after that session, we had lots of smiles on faces, and I think for lots of the parents and carers, we got through that maths could be fun and it could be challenging, and it wasn't something to fear. Really, within that session as well, it was about modelling the importance of having a positive attitude towards maths, and talking about how children are sponges and absorb everything. One of the things that I took forward to them was, when you swear at home, your children tell us straight away. So imagine if they're picking up these things, they're also going to be picking up when you're saying that you're struggling with maths, and the children absorb that too. then after that, we started having lots of sessions with what we called SKUs, which are subject knowledge enhancement workshops. And those were really about teaching maths, really, teaching maths for the parents. And it was a real investment. It was a time investment, but it was something that we felt was really important to ensure everyone was on the same page, but ultimately to make sure that our children were feeling confident within their home lives as well as their school lives, and we did that via the parents. Those sessions were really, really important because I started from basics, and I ensured that everyone felt on the same page, and we were building. It was those fundamental building blocks again. From there, once we started to have more confidence within our parent groups, then we moved to year group specific workshops. So at the beginning, we started with everyone. Then we started having our year group specific workshops. And that really helped because they were tailored to the needs of each year group. And that meant we could really zero in on what the maths in that class looks like. And it benefited the parents for those children, because understanding the importance of early maths and how integral that is in reception is incredibly important. But in upper key stage 2, you also have the mathematical content becomes increasingly demanding for the parents. So there's a difference in what's needed for those parental groups. Something else I just wanted to mention really quickly was that it can be a little bit harder to get some people on board. You're never just going to have everyone that's really easy to reach, and there isn't a magic remedy because people have their own stories and experiences when it comes to school and maths. Like I said, I could talk about so many things that I would do to avoid going to a maths lesson when I was 15 years old. I was absolutely awful. I feel very sorry for my maths teacher at that time. So we had to really build on that trust. So I would do one-to-one sessions with parents that didn't feel confident walking through the door with 20 other parents. If I have hard to reach parents or carers, I get to know them. I just chat to them. I let them recognize me as a human being first and foremost before I am a teacher at the school. And I talk about myself in a night, so they get to know me as a human again, rather than just I am Miss Stokes, that scary person that's trying to drag them into workshops. We also, something that we were very lucky to be able to do, and I know it's not so easy for everyone, is that if we had any adults available, such as TAs or teachers, we would ensure that they were able to be removed from class where applicable and sort cover out. And we would take it in turns to look after some of the smaller children that came along if there wasn't any. So the parents felt that they didn't have to be watching them out of the corner in the eye or worry if they were crying in the pram. That was a luxury that we were able to have. And I know that's not always so easy. But it did mean that those parents were then very comfortable knowing that their children were with some trusted adults as well. And the other thing is the phone call. Don't underestimate the importance of a phone call as well. If a parent is reluctant to come through the school gates, if a parent is working, lots of our parents had 2 or 3 jobs, we would then make phone calls as well to ensure that they were still getting that same content from us. On top of that, another thing that we really focused on was making sure that we have manipulative bags for parents and children that we felt would benefit from them across from reception class all the way up to year 6, because manipulatives are just as good in year 6 if anyone's listening to this and doesn't use them. And we would have sessions on how to use them, why they were important, and any work that they were doing at home would be really framed around those manipulative bags. That wasn't necessary for every child, but for those parents and children that we felt that would work really well, we did that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. That's just, there's so much that's come out of that story that you're telling, and there's quite a few follow-up questions as well. But what really comes through is that sort of building of trust and starting from, you know, making everybody feel comfortable and relaxed. And so many times I've heard when talking about maths anxiety, you know, there's no point trying to get them to understand simultaneous equations if they're in that state of fear. You just can't do it. And that sounds, you know, that comes through that was the foundation of everything that you were doing, which is brilliant. there's a question in the chat actually that I'm going to share with you, Emma, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So it says, what made you change your mind about maths and then go on to teach maths? How did that 15-year-old hiding from the classroom end up becoming a maths teacher?
Well, my first job pre-teaching, I worked in an events department, and I realised that numbers were really important to my role, and I couldn't kind of hide away from it so much anymore. So I taught myself a lot, and then when I trained to be a primary teacher, I think I realised really early on that the teaching of maths, what needs to be done, especially in early maths, key stage 1 and early is really where I feel the most comfortable. That's where my heart lies, is building those fundamentals for children, to be able to teach it really well. You have to know it really, really well. And I think once those stresses were alleviated for me, and once it was about the children, then it became something I focused more on. And then when I was teaching it, I thought, oh, I'm really good at teaching this. I don't often blow my own trumpet, but I'm actually really good at teaching maths. And I think the reason why I'm really good at teaching maths is because I didn't understand it growing up. So now I always have little Emma Cate in my head when I'm teaching the children. I think, how would a 7-year-old me need this explained to her? And there's a child in my class at the moment that really reminds me of how I was when I was little. And sometimes when she's just not getting it, I just picture myself in my head and think, okay, actually, this is probably the best way to do it with her.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting that you kind of go back and you have that empathy, and it also reflects the fact that it is, it's an emotional issue rather than an ability issue that's getting in the way, and that, little Emma Cate was very anxious about the maths, but actually completely had the ability to do it. So thank you for that. So we're going to move on. Oh, and the other thing I want to pick up was about manipulatives, actually, because we're doing lots about manipulatives for Key Stage 3 at the moment. We've just run a network and we've got a new scheme of work that uses them. So that's, aimed at sort of year 7 to year 9. Are they really key in overcoming it, do you think?
I definitely think so, because, sorry, I cut you off there. Going back to what Dom was saying about working memory, manipulatives are so integral, I found, from early years to year 6 for freeing up that working memory and ensuring that the maths itself can be concentrated on, and that visually they can see what's going on. I talk quite often when I have delivered some other sessions about manipulatives about the division and multiplication of fractions. That's really, really hard in an abstract form for a 9-year-old, 10-year-old child to comprehend. And I would imagine I've never taught Key Stage 3, but I would imagine anything similar in Key Stage 3. They're still children ultimately. And to be able to just pick that up in your head and just see it is really, really tricky. And having it laid out in front of you, I think, makes it so much more applicable, and conceptual understanding is deepened. It works because for our parents, we use manipulatives for everything when we are explaining anything from the 5-ness of 5 in reception up until simple algebra in Key Stage 2 potentially. It's everything we do is via manipulatives, because that's how we are teaching people well and helping them learn and process. So if we're doing that with adults, we probably should make sure we're still doing that with all of the pupils that we're teaching in Key Stage 3 as well.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really good to hear. Okay, I'm going to move on now to a whole different key stage, because we're going to move over to you, Rosie, and you're working in FE colleges, and you've been doing some really interesting sort of case studies and research around maths anxiety for those learners that are resitting their GCSE in the FE sector. Can you just tell us a bit about what you've been doing there?
Yeah, we've been lucky enough to be selected as a maths centre for excellence at Fareham College. So there's 21 centres across the UK, and we work regionally and then all together. And we've had the opportunity to get involved in some action research, and for us, maths anxiety was top of the list as to something we wanted to address with our students. So what we've been able to do is bring on board maths coaches. So specifically at Fairham, they were learning support assistants that had a real aptitude for maths. And what they've done is they've worked with students one-to-one and in small group intervention to really plug those skills gaps. But what we wanted to focus on, particularly for last year, given the whole COVID scenario, is we knew that our students' mental health would take a dive and that they would need extra support. So we wanted to put another spin on that, and not only focusing in on the maths anxiety, but also trying to develop that resilience and a growth mindset with our students. And we were lucky enough to be able to replicate our coaching model over 6 other colleges in Hampshire, and the results have been outstanding. So you know, it's been so fantastic to give those students that extra support, and I'm on a mission to get it everywhere. So it really has been beneficial.
Brilliant, thank you. And are there any particular challenges for that cohort in comparison to learners that are doing their GCSEs in year 11 for the first time?
I think the fear of maths is ingrained. You know, all the things that Dom mentioned earlier, I was like, yep, I've seen that in our adult students, I've seen that in our study program students. You know, Emma talking about trying to get into the classroom, you know, that's a daily battle in the maths corridors in an FE college, particularly as students have this newfound freedom where they don't want to turn up, they can go out the door, and you know, it's much easier to do. So, you know, we're really getting them when they've gone through primary and felt rubbish at maths, they've gone through secondary and felt rubbish at maths, and then to top all that off, they failed their exam, sometimes multiple times. So when we get them, you know, their confidence is just absolutely rock bottom. So trying to engage them and get them to attend is usually our biggest challenge in that first half term. And then not only that, it's hook them in really early on to, you know, you can do this. And it was really interesting that Emma raised about, you know, in society it's okay to say, oh, I'm not actually that good at maths. We probably wouldn't ever say, oh, I can't read, but it's okay to say, oh, I'm not very good at maths. And, you know, breaking down those barriers and trying to instill this resilience and this can-do attitude, really.
Yeah, and I know that you've, in your action research, you've been particularly looking at mastery as an approach. Why does that seem particularly fitting for this cohort?
I think because they come to us lacking in confidence, you know, and we've got so much to do around getting them to engage. So not only are they lacking in confidence, they're in a new setting. They've got a whole new group of friends, a whole new course, you know, college is very, very different to school. So they're already dealing with those challenges. And mastery for us is all about the journey and not necessarily the answer. And then that kind of focus on what you know already. We're not necessarily picking up those weaknesses and highlighting those straight away. So it gives the students an opportunity to really explore. And we just feel that mastery really supports that building resilience, which is, you know, what we're all about, and that growth mindset. And then with the coaching, that really adds that extra layer of support with that deeper understanding.
Brilliant, thanks. And obviously with the disruption of COVID, it's only going to have exacerbated that maths anxiety for some learners, and you know, they'll have had that time where they maybe haven't been engaging. Are you looking to do anything differently from September for the next cohort because of the disruption that they've had, or is there anything that, you know, or do you think this sort of mastery approach, which is quite condensed anyway, is quite well suited for that situation?
We will continue with mastery. We found that works really well, particularly with engaging those students early on. We are carrying on with our maths coaching for another year, and our college has actually invested in coaches now as a permanent fixture, which I'm absolutely thrilled about. And what we're able to do is offer that extra layer of support. So not only do we have the timetabled classes, we have the coaching sessions that are on top of that, and then we're able to run things like maths clinics and workshops. As I'm sure everybody's had to do, we've got very good at being online and delivering in different ways. So, you know, God forbid we end up in that situation again, we know we can flip to that style, but you know, hopefully we're face to face is the way forward. We definitely get better results that way. I think the anxiety around not looking good at maths and the emotions that come from that, one-to-one and face-to-face really does work better for us.
Brilliant, thank you. You've answered what I was thinking, because I wondered whether them being able to sort of work independently remotely might have made them feel more secure, or whether it actually, but no, you're interesting to hear the face-to-face works much better. Dominic, there's a question here for you that I'm going to ask. It says, are there any studies which show that playfulness and humour can play a part in reducing maths anxiety? Is there anything around the sort of culture, I suppose, of the classroom?
There are some studies that have shown, for example, cooperative learning and creating games around maths. So particularly digital games. So if you turn it into a sort of a active recreational maths games, yeah, indeed, research has shown that that can actually reduce. And the thing is, with strategy-based research in the area, they all reduce or have different results in terms of the significance of the reduction of maths anxiety, and some differ in whether they actually have an attainment increase as well. Sometimes it's just a reduction in anxiety, not necessarily an increase in performance. But yeah, certainly there has been research that has shown that active recreational mathematics games, cooperative learning sessions versus traditional sessions very much support a reduction of maths anxiety.
Brilliant. And so by cooperative learning sessions, do you mean sort of group work, problem solving together, that type of activity?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. So the cooperative learning, what can be very, very simple, but very, very effective, is having a group of children, and sometimes it could be of mixed ability in maths, having them to come together and just discussing their approaches to a problem or a set of work, how they got around it. And sometimes that peer education, it can take that immediate pressure off it being the teacher. And I mean that in terms of those that will struggle with anxiety. Research and some of our own work as well has shown that those children, in their own words, will see the teacher as almost like the shadow that stands over them and judges them, whereas those that are very positive and secure in their ability see the teacher as someone that's there to facilitate them and support them and reward them for their successes in maths. And I think sometimes if children have got themselves into that rut of that negative perception around maths, having their peers that can help them and support them, those conversations, it can remove that sort of pressure on them that it's coming from the teacher, but it also allows them to explore and understand it from a different perspective. And sometimes children are better explaining things to other children than we are as practitioners. So yeah, just having that collaborative learning can really actually make such a positive difference for children as they explore and understand different approaches to maths.
Brilliant. And that really reminds me of what you were saying at the beginning about it being perceived as very rigid and not very creative, whereas actually that allows students to experience the flexibility and the more creative side, because I'm sure, you know, mathematicians would say it's actually a highly creative subject, but it's just exposing children to that side of maths, I suppose. So it's quite a nice way to do that. Thank you. Rosie, there's another question for you about your coaching sessions. Prady's asking if attendance to those is good.
It is, but because I get the parents on board. So what we do is we try and sell it like you're so lucky, you've been selected, you know, it's like private tutoring. We really, you know, it is like private tutoring, but we really egg it up. And then what we do is we contact parents and we do the whole, your child's been selected. We do have to have very strict turnarounds. If they miss 2 or 3 sessions, that's it, they come off. And we've had a waiting list all year. So yeah, it's been very popular.
Amazing. And so do you select some of the learners that especially have a particular need for it, or have you got sufficient that everyone can have a few sessions?
So this year, because we wanted to do a real focus on students that suffered with maths anxiety, we did a questionnaire based on MARS, which is the Maths Anxiety Rating Scale. And then from that, we identified the students that we felt fitted our criteria. In previous years, we have worked with students that have just self-identified as being anxious, or that we have identified through observation and initial assessment. And sometimes those sessions have been really short and sharp. So actually student A needs support with one particular topic and we plug those gaps and then on their way they go. Other students have needed that sort of slow drip all year. So we're going to do a mixture coming up 21-22 and try and just see where the need of our students takes us with the direction of the coaching.
Brilliant, thanks. And actually there was a question for you, Emma, as well, about engaging with parents. Do you feel that now that we've had all this homeschooling and parents have had to be somewhat more engaged, on the whole most parents have been more engaged, do you think that they would be more open to initiatives like the one that you had before in a sort of post-COVID world?
I think from my experience, definitely. I started a new school in September after relocating, and what I found really tricky at the beginning of the year was it was really hard to get to know parents because of restrictions on them coming in and out of the building, and wearing face masks at the gates, which are really important but hard when you can't smile at someone for them to get to know you. And I found that first term quite tough to engage with the parents fully. But actually, surprisingly, when lockdown hit and lots of our children were being taught remotely that were not key worker children or vulnerable, that's where the relationships developed, because they were seeing me on screen. I was calling them all the time to check in and make sure everyone was okay, that I was at the other end of a direct message if they were struggling with something. And that made all the difference, I think. And I think in general for lots of parents, not just, and of course in primary, we are far more accessible than secondary. I totally understand that because of the nature of our job and our cohorts. But I do think being exposed to what's going on in some capacity for parents has enabled those relationships to flourish in ways they may not have otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. I think being a parent of a primary school child, I know what you mean. There's been a lot more communication, and definitely I feel as though I know my daughter's teachers much better than I maybe would have just by those passing moments at the gate. Thank you. I'm going to slightly shift the conversation a bit now, and I'm going to come back to you, Dom, about it's something we haven't really talked about role models and how maths is perceived. So is there anything about that which sort of feeds into this social acceptance of admitting that you're not good at maths and that it's okay to be worried and anxious about maths? Because when people are asked to describe a mathematician, they probably imagine an Einstein-like character writing on a blackboard with lots of complicated equations and symbols, which makes it seem quite exclusive. Is there something about that, and is there anything we can do about it?
So I think culturally we have, and maybe even on a global perspective, there is this perception that maths very much defines intelligence. And if you see or notice that someone's good at maths, and children are very good at doing this in the lesson, particularly those that, again, struggle with maths, they'll sometimes put more effort into identifying someone that's good so that they can rely on them or copy their work, rather than putting that effort into trying to actually overcome their issues themselves. But there is quite a lot of emphasis on maths defines intelligence. And I think that's why from so early on in education that children seem to, some children can have this defeatist approach that they already know, they can already acknowledge who's good and who's better and who's faster. And that seems to very much define their feelings about themselves, their self-efficacy, their self-concept. The value that they have in their own ability and learning seems to very much be determined by maths. And perhaps we need to emphasize that, being skilled in, and a musical instrument, art, these are amazing skills. Maths isn't the only thing that defines intelligence or ability or skill or value or worth. So I do think from a cultural perspective, yes, maths historically, so we're thinking about socially constructed attitudes and perspectives. Maths, yes, very much has been sort of grounded as the subject to work towards if you want to be considered intelligent. But perhaps that's because of the jobs and the careers that are associated with it, such as a child once said to me in the reception class, I love maths because my dad's an aerospace engineer. He works at British Aerospace. And that's the kind of perspective. I mean, it's great for the children if their parents can support them from those roles, but it can also be quite damaging for other children as well if they just think maths is this subject where if you're good at it, you're intelligent. If you're not, then you're not worthy of being in education. And the conversations I've had with children and maths experts and teachers as well in various schools have all brought about this central theme of maths defines intelligence. So I think that's very much something that, as people that are interested in maths and trying to remove this negative connotation around it, this is one of the central things I think we need to try and challenge and break down, is that maths isn't the only subject that defines your intelligence. You can be valuable and worthy in other subjects within education. So yeah, I think there was another part to the question, Hannah, but I seem to have forgot.
No, that's really interesting, and it is about that sort. And I think there was a shift with the new Ofsted framework about sort of a broad and balanced curriculum, and which is really heartening in that way, to make sure that all types of intelligence are recognised. But also maybe there's something about challenging who we think mathematicians are, and actually they're not just Einsteins or aerospace engineers. They are doing jobs all around us, as you said, Emma, when you first started working, your first job was very numerical. So have either Emma or Rosie, have you done anything about sort of challenging stereotypes or perceptions of maths in your roles?
This is just a little anecdote, but one of the biggest things I found, especially with my with all of my pupils, but especially the girls, really identified with and loved learning about Katherine Johnson, and Hidden Figures really had a moment a few years ago, as it rightly should, and the children in my last school from year 1 up until year 6 really took something from that story. And I think it was the first time I'd really realised just how important it was to frame maths within a real life context rather than just maths. And just as a quick aside, going back to Dom's point about maths not being the only subject that's worthy, I completely agree. And I also think it's worth being mindful of the fact that I think maths is so often othered in popular culture and media, and it's seen as something that's away from the ordinary person. If you are engaging in maths, you're something slightly different, and our media is really good at building up that narrative. I think in lockdown there were a lot of headlines of your year 7 your 7-year-old child is learning how to be a NASA engineer with this ridiculous maths, and could you solve these equations? They're really hard and they're for 11-year-olds. And I think that kind of that framing sort of seeps into the consciousness of parents, and then seeps down into our children as well, and that kind of furthers their reluctance to engage in maths, because they see it as something so alien and over there and not for them because they're an ordinary person. I think that's important to think about as well.
Yeah, I can really recognise that. Rosie, yeah.
I was just going to say, in FE, we're all about contextualising. That's how we hook our students in. They've come to college to study brick or engineering. They haven't come to do their maths and English again. So for us, we spend a lot of time trying to embed maths into their practical activities, and that's sometimes getting creative and going into workshops and delivering that way. Particularly with the new T levels that have come in, we have to do work-based projects. So, just that piece of work around contextualizing and finding those real life examples and giving it value to the teens that are coming to us particularly, we found to be really, really beneficial. And that goes, I don't think there's a gender specific there. You go into the salon and you do it the same as we would go into the kitchens or the brick workshop and do it. So yeah, that's one of our key activities.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I think I do hear a lot about making sure that it's well, it just helps them to recognise the value of what they're learning, doesn't it, when it's shared in that way. There's a question here from Liz, which is for you, Rosie. How do you engage the students or the parents when you need to cover the drier topics at GCSE level? So is there any way of sort of bringing those to life a bit more, maybe with this contextualisation?
Yeah, I think it's just getting as creative as you can. I mean, we have a little bit more freedom, I think, in FE than you would have in a secondary, where we can kind of pick our classes up and take them outside or take them into a workshop. And it's just about being as creative as we can. Emma spoke a lot earlier about manipulatives, and we try and get some really unusual manipulatives for students to use, particularly in the kitchens. I know when we were on lockdown, we were had students tearing around the house. Actually, I've got a 7-year-old, and he did a birthday party where they had to go and find something pink and then bring it back. And we almost did something similar with our students in some of our maths classes, where they were creating manipulatives out of pieces of pasta and things like that. So for us in FE, it's definitely just about being creative as we can, and banging the drum with the parents. And it's just all about what Emma said earlier about building those relationships, being available. And it's tough to do when you've got big cohorts, but I think that this, what you get at the end of it pays off.
Brilliant, thank you so much. We're starting to run out of time, but and it's just been so fascinating, and we could keep talking all day about this, and it's such a huge topic, as we sort of chatted before the session started, that it's just woven into everything, and it's so wide-reaching. But I'm sure that the maths teaching community that are listening have found this really gripping and really interesting. Lots of great chat going on, so thank you to everyone that's contributed, and I can't thank you enough for finding time to talk today. But before we go, I've got one last question, which somebody has read my mind and put in the chat for me as well, so I'm glad to know that it's what people would like answered. So before we go, I've got one last question. If there was one piece of advice for teachers who are supporting learners with maths anxiety, what would that be? So I'm going to start with you, Emma, if that's okay.
I'm going to take it back to parents and talk about, in terms of supporting our learners via the parents, I think you have to have collaboration, as we've said so much today, as the ethos of your school. It has to be the very fabric of everything that you do, and that's not just for maths, that's for all things, but particularly with maths. And when you're working with parents, don't expect change overnight. This takes time if you're going to implement it well. It's not a box ticking exercise. It's small incremental steps that are going to make your parents and carers feel more comfortable, and that's going to be far more effective in the long run for our learners, rather than I've done a workshop, quick tick, oh, I've done another workshop, quick tick. It's got to be a whole school approach. What was really great at my last school, and what I'm building here as well with so many fabulous staff, is ensuring that everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, that everyone, we all had the same mindset when it came to working with our parents and working with our learners, and how we talked about maths and how we engaged with maths, and ensuring there was a real positivity there from reception all the way up to year 6 in how we framed maths within our lessons, how we used the manipulatives, how we engaged with parents. Everything was very positive and heartening for our learners.
Brilliant, thank you, great advice. Rosie, I'm going to move on to you.
Well, I totally echo Emma's sentiments. We're all about collaboration. I think if you can get that whole college or whole school approach, then you're really on your way. Particularly in FE, I would say the thing that has helped us the most is getting our vocational areas on board with supporting maths, and whether that's them coming into your classroom to support with some of the delivery or allowing us to go into theirs. That has really helped hammer home that message about how important maths is beyond school, and where it sits in our everyday living.
Brilliant, thank you. I love that, and I think it's really applicable to secondary as well as FE. Let's get into the food tech room and see where the maths is living there, and let's go to music and see where the maths is. Yeah, that's great advice, thank you. And lastly, Dom.
Mine would be, so from a psychological perspective, mine would be to just always be mindful that maths anxiety is, in most cases, it's an emotional issue rather than an intellectual deficit. And if we think about how maths anxiety impacts working memory, if we can reduce those negative emotions, we free up the working memory, because obviously working memory will process the emotions over the maths. So if we can make someone feel more comfortable in maths, if we can alleviate the anxiety, you suddenly free up working memory capacity to actually focus on the maths, because unfortunately the maths and the anxiety both resource. So it's just to remember really that maths anxiety is all about emotional regulation. Make the child or make the learner feel more comfortable with maths, and you'll start to see that then you can work on the proficiency side of things. And also for any practitioners out there that are wanting to engage in action research, is just to always be mindful of, yes, you may want to try and support a child with maths anxiety. So you may be trying to implement something that reduces maths anxiety, but just strip maths anxiety back to the components that make it up. So think about, for example, is what I'm doing trying to address maybe self-efficacy, or is what I'm doing trying to address the child's resilience? Am I trying to promote the value of maths with this strategy? Am I trying to show the child the wider applications of the subject? Is it all designed to make them more motivated, or is it based around actually working on their skill and their proficiency in the subject? So for anyone that's wanting to implement any strategies of your own, just try and strip back the label of maths anxiety into the components that actually make it up. And if you can start to address those components, then ultimately you will work towards reducing maths anxiety.
Brilliant, thank you. Really appreciate your comments there, Dom. Thanks so much for all of your contributions and sharing all of your knowledge. It's been a brilliant session. I've enjoyed it so much. I've noticed that one of our brilliant Pearson team have just shared in the chat the Nominate Your Maths Champions form. So if you are working with somebody who is a great maths champion and doing great work to support our learners in the maths community, then please do nominate them. I'm going to do a really quick shout out for a couple here. One of them I cannot go without saying because it's such a nice thing. So the first one is from Joelle Harradine, nominating Stephanie Shoemaker. Amazing teacher, not only looks out for the students in her class, but she's leading the way in our mastery programme for Key Stage 3, tirelessly works with teachers on their CPD and looking at different methods and structures. Her dedication to continually developing her mathematical understanding is commendable. And then the next one, Tayab Majid, nominating Simon Bull. Simon's the kindest person. He always has time to listen to concerns that I may have and has helped me grow as a teacher. If he ran for Prime Minister, I'd vote for him based on his integrity and being a complete sweetheart. So they're lovely. Keep championing each other and celebrating all the great work that you're doing. Really appreciate that. So that brings us to the end. And as I say, I've been totally gripped by the whole thing. So thank you so much. Really great advice being shared, and you've all given up your time to be here. So grateful. And to everyone that's attended, thanks for joining the session, supporting learners to overcome maths anxiety as part of the Pearson Maths Festival. We hope you found it interesting, helpful, and a starting point to further discussion. We look forward to seeing your other sessions over the course of the festival, which runs until Friday. You'll see a feedback survey open in your browser when we end the webinar. So if you can just take a couple of minutes to complete that, that would be fantastic. And finally, we'd like to remind you again to join the conversation on social media and beyond using the hashtag Pearson Maths Fest 21 and entering mini competitions, nominating your colleagues as maths champions, answering polls that you might see on the Twitter handle @Pearson Schools. So please do get involved, and there'll be further information on the website, so please have a look. Thanks so much everybody for joining today. It was absolutely brilliant. Really grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.